Going through this month, right, really going through texts that speak of the incarnation, right, that speak of, as David mentioned, God coming into the flesh. And so this morning, the Lord laid a passage on my heart this weekend as we were, and some of you were there last night, so Greg and Karen, right up here in the front, I'm going to mention them again in a moment. I asked Greg permission if I could share our conversation. What was amazing is they have this spectacular light show that is, it's phenomenal. It's incredible to watch. And so we were there last night, and as I was thinking about what they've put energy towards, I was actually thinking about this text because they're living out in the flesh, in their neighborhood, what we're going to read about this morning. And so if you have your scriptures, you can turn to John chapter 1. But I'm actually, and before we read that text, I'm going to have a couple of us read two other texts that are going to sort of help us kind of see where this is coming from. So, can I have two volunteers who don't know what they're doing yet? Okay, Patty, can you read in just a second Exodus 29, 45 to 46? I'll say that again when you need me to. Exodus 29, 45 to 46. Can I have another one? Kathy? Oh, no, Sheila, I'll include you somehow. I'll get you something too. Kathy, can you do Revelation 21, 3 to 4? Revelation 21, 3 to 4. So Patty is Exodus 29, 45 to 46. Revelation 21, 3 to 4. So I'm going to have these ladies read these texts, and we're just going to ask a simple question. It's not a rocket science question. It's actually very simple. But what is God communicating? So we're going for all part one of the story, right in Exodus, the very end of the story in Revelation, the biblical story at least, that it will obviously continue today. So Patty, go ahead and read, and then I'll have Kathy read, and then we'll just ask the question, what is God communicating in these texts? Real simple. Go for it, Patty.
Okay. Then I will dwell among the Israelites and be their God. They will know that I am the Lord their God, who brought them out of Egypt, so that I might dwell among them. I am their God, the Lord their God.
Okay, thanks, Patty. Kathy, you want to read Revelation, the end of the story?
And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away."
Thank you. So what we see in these texts is what? What is God's heart? What is he after? What's he long for? Relationship. Okay, he is our God.
To be among his people.
To be among his people, to dwell among his people, right? And as we know, this is how things were designed in the beginning. This was the Garden of Eden. Before humans rebelled, this was the reality that God created. He intended always to dwell with his people. Right, so one of the things I've noticed over the years as I've talked to people about the incarnation is kind of this false idea that Jesus coming was like plan B. It's like, oh, well, things got screwed up, so God's going to fix it, and thus Jesus had to come. The problem with that is that's not the biblical premise. That's assuming God had one plan, we're so powerful we messed up his plan, so he's going to come fix it. The beauty, though, of what we see in Scripture is that God's heart was always to be with his people. So Jesus coming is the most natural thing that is completely in alignment with what God has always done. If you go all the way back to the garden, there's a really important text in Genesis 3, 1, 2, or 3, one of those. It's in the beginning. I can't remember which one. Where the text says that God walked with Adam in the cool of the day. Always, God's heart has been to be with his people. It's always been about relationships. So even when we go to the Exodus text, or all the way till the end at the book of Revelation, God says, I've always been about this. So when I bring things to their fulfillment, I will then bring to fruition what I always intended. The beauty is we're not that powerful to stop what he intends. So when we pick up John 1, John, as he is articulating this, he's going to use this language to describe the same thing that was just discussed. So we're actually going to read a few verses this morning, John chapter 1. I'm going to ask one person to read it, and then I'm just going to copy Jessica, because a couple months ago she just started reading the second one herself out of the text, because that's the one that we'll be coming out of. So could I have somebody read John 1 through 14? Okay. And actually, Sheila, can I have you do it a second? I just like when you read things. It's great. We'll let Sheila do it. She's so mad. Okay. And to go for it, yes.
John 1:1-14.
Yes, please.
American Standard. The deity of Jesus Christ. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being by him, and apart from him nothing came into being that has come to being. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. There came a man sent from God, whose name was John. He came for a witness, that he might bear witness of the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came that he might bear witness of the light. There was a true light which, coming into the world, enlightens every man. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and those who were with his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believe in his name, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, Sheila, you want to read that one?
In the beginning, before all time, was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God himself. He was present originally with God. All things were made and came into existence through him, and without him was not even one thing made that has come into being. In him was life, and the light was the light of men. And the light shines on in the darkness, for the darkness has never overpowered it. There came a man sent from God, whose name was John. This man came to witness, that he might testify of the light, that all men might believe in it, adhere to it, trust in it through him. He was not the light himself, but came that he might bear witness regarding the light. There it was, the true light was coming into the world, that illumines every person. He came into the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which belonged to him, and they who were his own did not receive him and did not welcome him. But to as many as did receive and welcome him, he gave the authority, the power, the privilege, the right to become the children of God, that to those who believe in and rely on his name, who owe their birth neither to blood, nor to the will of the flesh, nor to the will of man, but to God. They are born of God. And the Word, Christ, became flesh, and tabernacled, lived among us. And we actually saw his glory, such glory as an only begotten Son receives from his Father, full of grace, favor, loving kindness, and truth.
Awesome. Thanks, Sheila. And I love that Sheila's, is that the Amplified? They translated dwell as tabernacled, which is exactly what that imagery is. So I'll get to that in a minute. So that was great. I've actually never heard translation use that tabernacled phrase. So the beauty, as John is articulating what's going on here, right? In the very beginning, in verse 1, he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He's very simply communicating, especially into his first century context. There was ideas out there, which we have versions of this in our context as well, that Jesus was either really more human than he was God, or he was more God than he was human, right? And so we have different versions of that throughout, but the reality was that this Jesus of Nazareth, he is the one who always was. So John is making a very clear distinction. So if you ever talk with any J-dubs, if you have them Jehovah's Witnesses come to your door, one of the things that you will realize is this text is the pivotal text, that one letter was translated wrong, which is essentially how that entire cult was birthed. So here's what a J-dub will say. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. A God. One simple letter changes everything. So John is making very clear there is one God. And this one who is the Word is him, right? So that he's making very clear. And as he goes on, verse 5 says, and the light, right now connecting that word, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Again, as the light comes into the world, again, that's what we celebrate, right? This is what's amazing about watching Greg and Karen in the light show last night at their house. What's fun is it was in the physical realm. You're literally watching light up against a dark sky. Like, it's striking to watch that. But as I was sitting there last night, I was thinking about this text actually, because I realized, the beauty is there's something so much deeper going on. Because that star that is on their roof, right, did represent something, and it does in the natural, but in the reality of it, this light that shines in the darkness has not, cannot, never will overcome it. See, the beauty is, I asked Greg if I could share the story, so I was really intrigued by what they put that energy towards. And so as I asked Greg about that, so he said, their grandson had 60 hours of programming to get that light show going. I don't know anything about computers, and that is just amazing to me. I don't even know how any of that works. And then over a month, you said, right, of like light prep and getting the lights ready. So the question is, why? Why go through all that? It's an incredible light show, so you could say it's worth that right there, and maybe it is. But as I talked with Greg, there's something much deeper, because Greg and Karen, they're just doing this. So here's their approach. They're in a neighborhood. It's like the Jeremiah text that we read earlier. And they're asking, how do we speak peace? How are we the light in this darkness? Because I know for the both of them, it's not about the light show. The light show is what brings people together. And like Greg said, they'll have neighbors come. People will ask, because they're playing all these songs. Like David said, they're declaring who Jesus is. And people will come, and it's about that connection. It's about doing this very thing. It's about light shining in darkness. So they are light in that neighborhood. So the beauty of what was going on was it wasn't just about the lights, is they're literally saying, the light of the world has shown up. That light lives within us. So they're taking seriously what it looks like to be light in darkness, in their neighborhood. And so I was amazed by that, because the beauty is that was intentional, right? They're pursuing something, and they've decided, we're not just going to be a neighbor that just shows up and everybody goes inside their house, you say hi, we all go in behind our closed curtains, and that's that. They've said, there's something more than this. There's something that we get to be about, right? And someone told me a long time ago, and this is what I was joking with Greg about, someone said to me a long time ago, there's no retirement in the kingdom. Like, so Greg's technically retired. But the beauty is there's no retirement in the kingdom. We're doing kingdom ministry till the day we die. And that's what they're living out. So I'm blown away by you guys. I thought it was absolutely incredible. Because the light shines in the darkness, and they're now saying, we're here. We're going to set up shop. And even in that Jeremiah text, they're seeking the peace. Because as those conversations happen, it's how peace really starts to come into a neighborhood, right? It comes in one relationship at a time, one conversation at a time. But as that light comes in the darkness, then we get to verse 10, where it says that he was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. What's amazing about Harry Molina in the back right now is that Jesus shows up in the flesh. Now, we've talked about this some, even when we were going through Isaiah. If the Jews would have simply read their book, everything that Jesus came as was crystal clear, and they still missed him. Why? Because he showed up just like Melina, crying as a baby. They were still expecting they were expecting a Caesar to show up. And how does God become light in darkness? That's how he started. And they missed it. So it says that even though he's the one who created this world, that world did not recognize him. So it's helpful for us, and this is something that I was challenged by this morning, to think, do I have expectations of God that aren't actually true? And do I miss him? Do I miss Jesus because I expect him to be like this? Right? Do I miss him because I really want him to be like this because it would be easier for me if he was? So they missed him. The world did not recognize him. Right? I remember we had this conversation a couple years ago, even with our girls, because one of the things you'll notice, and we've all seen them, like the sweetest Jesus, right? The pictures like flowing blonde hair and really pretty blue eyes. Well, the reality is that original painting was by a German guy, right? Who was essentially making God in his image. But Jesus of Nazareth, right? I mean, it's interesting watching the news now, right? What's going on? Because Jesus came, he was a Jew, a Hebrew. His skin would have been, he would have looked like a Jew in that context. He didn't look like sweet as Jesus. That's not reality. But why do I mention that? Because we can all do this, myself included. We can easily try to make Jesus in our image. We want him to look like what we want him to look like. So to somebody living in the Enlightenment in that period, who was Jesus? He was a really white, well-manicured male, right? Who we're going to make pictures of. Completely inaccurate. But the question is, for us this morning, as we think about where we are in our context, do we see him? Do we see him in a world that may not recognize him? And then the beauty is, like what Greg and Karen are doing in their neighborhood, we get to say, as we are living out our faith, as we're living out our witness, do the people around us see him through us? Who's the Jesus that they're interacting with? Because if we're filled with his Holy Spirit, wherever we show up, he shows up. The question is, who do they see? So I was singing, I'm going to keep going back to Greg and Karen, because as we were singing that song this morning, and that same line hit me that hit David, that God is for me, not against me. So simple. And yet, I think of like when Greg and Karen's neighbors show up, and I know their heart in this because we were talking about it last night. Here's the beautiful thing. When they encounter Jesus' people, do they come away thinking they're for me? So when my neighbors encounter us, what do they know most about me? Am I a Republican or Democrat? Am I against this? Like, what is it that they're going to walk away thinking? Are they going to walk away thinking he's for me? And that's a challenging question. Because if God is for us, then we have to ask ourselves, are we for them? Or are we against them because they're on that side? Are we against them because they don't look quite like I do, or they speak this language, or they're from that country, or whatever it is? So as God comes in the flesh, we show up in the flesh. And so as we look at verse 14, all of this build-up, the Word became flesh, and again, Sheila's, the Amplified Translation said, and tabernacled among us. The beauty of what we read in this text of the incarnation is, again, this is what God has always longed to do. He comes and to be with us in the flesh. So what are Greg and Karen doing? They're in the flesh. They're in their neighborhood. They're right there living out their everyday lives, but they're not everyday people. They're everyday saints. That's the difference. So light dwells within them, right? The light of life is the John language will be. So the beauty is we get to ask ourselves this morning, and my challenge to us is, where are you every day? Where are your in the flesh moments? Maybe it's at home with your immediate family. Maybe those under your roof don't know him as light yet. So maybe it starts there, maybe for some of us. Maybe it's the people you see at the grocery store every week. Maybe it's those you're going to work with tomorrow. So where are you in the flesh? Just think for a moment, because in a minute, you're going to write down a couple names. We're going to get there practically in a second. So the beauty of this is that as God comes, right, if you go to Philippians 2 and read that amazing passage, right, about Jesus giving up his divine rights, right? He is always God and yet chose to come and be confined in the form of a human. Jesus of Nazareth in the flesh, coming and crying and doing all the things that Melina is doing in the back because she's a baby. This is how he came. So the beauty is that he comes to us. What we could not do because of our rebellion, because of sin, we cannot get to him. We cannot live a right life. We cannot do the things to get to God. If you think about every other religion on the planet, there's really only one difference, and it's the massive difference. It's the difference between, I didn't make this up, I heard it somewhere, but I think it's brilliant. It's the difference between the words do and done. Every other religious system on the planet, it's up to us to do certain things to attain favor with either the God or the gods or however they frame it. The truth, though, is that what we could not do It's been done. What we celebrated when we celebrated the Lord's Supper this morning. That's the difference. God did it. We receive it. Even in all of our brokenness, this text says, while we were yet enemies, his enemies, Christ died for us. So the beauty is, if we're going to then live in the way of Jesus, if we're going to, in our everyday life, we're going to be these incarnational people. If we're going to be those, like Greg and Karen, that say, in the flesh, we're going to walk this out. The beauty then is our mindset is always that we go to them, because that's what God does. Right? We're showing up in those spaces, whatever those spaces are. Right? We're in the flesh with them. Because right where they are is where we then exist, in the flesh, in the moments, in the conversations. Again, for some of us, we have multiple in the flesh places every week. Might be our own home, might be work, might be, again, wherever we frequent, wherever those spaces are, there are people there. And the beauty then is because what we see Jesus do again here is as he comes as a baby in first century Palestine, he identified and lived as a Jew in that context, right? He was not trying to be something other than he was. He showed up and he became like those. We'll read this letter in Romans, like when Paul will say, I become like the Jew to reach the Jews, like the Gentile to, what's he saying? He's saying, well, when I'm in Rome, I'm going to live like the Romans do. Okay, this is not like he's not making a moral equivocation. He's not saying, well, when I'm in the Rome, I'm just going to sin like the Romans do. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, but if I'm going to reach the Romans, I'm going to live like the Romans among the Romans, right? This is essentially just the missional lifestyle, right? If we were to move to a different country where English was not the first language, what's the first thing we would need to do? We would need to learn the language so that we can be there in the flesh, right? Because we're there to become like those, to live among those that we're called to reach. So I was sitting on my porch this morning, and I've got a couple neighbors, and really incredible guys. We've lived in that neighborhood for about 3 years, a little over 3 years, gotten to know these guys, been at parties, right? I mean, like, they've done the piñata, we've done the whole, like, we've just been around them for 3 years. Amazing people. Love these families. Well, both of them, as I've gotten to know them, and we've just, again, this has all just happened kind of in the flesh, in the neighborhood, right? And just hanging out, having drinks, having food, people are just talking. And over the few years, right, as we've been praying for our neighbors and learning to do what Greg and Karen are doing, right, these conversations about faith and just being a dad, being a husband, that's always where it starts. It just starts connecting, just naturally. See, this is the beauty of it. It's so easy, at least for me, the temptation is to just make it weird. Like that it's gotta, no, just be you, in the flesh, whatever your everyday is. Because that's natural. Like, so if Corey and I are hanging out, what's going to be a natural part of our conversation? We're probably going to talk about being married because we're married. That's just that's part of our journey. So as I was talking with these two guys, and we were talking about being dads and, you know, being husbands, and I began to realize that as they shared their background, they're both Catholic, right? Had grown up being like your Creasters, right? Go Christmas and Easter to Mass, but that's it. But never read the Bible. That's one of the things that would come up in conversation, right? And so as we would just be talking about, and I'd share my journey with Jesus as I'm learning, and I'm learning to have a relationship with him, well, then they began, and I began to invite them, like, hey, would you guys want to learn to read the Bible with me, and we can discover Jesus together? And they're both in. So like this morning, 6 a.m, we're on our porch. So as I'm sitting there with them, and we're going to start doing this, here's one of the things that was fun. I was thinking about Greg and Karen, because for Greg and Karen, it looks like that. For us, it might look different. For you, it's going to look different. But the beauty is, and what was fascinating is I was actually in this text with them this morning. So I thought, I'm going to test this out. I'm going to preach this today. Let's see how two people that have never read the Bible interact with this text. So all I did is we just read it through twice, just like we do. And I just asked, like, what do you notice? What stands out to you? That's the only question. It was that simple. And here's what was amazing. It makes me cry. So Adrian lives right across the street. Verse 1 through 5, here's what he said. The word's not even in the text he used, though. He said, it's saying that there's this light that comes and brings hope. Hope's not even in there. But as I listened to him, I thought, Father, this is what you're drawing people to yourself. Because for him, he knows what darkness feels like. He may not come to a church service, right? But he knows, he can identify with, I know what it feels like to feel dark. Everybody does. And then, so the simplicity of it is I listened to these two guys wrestle with this same text. It was fascinating because I'm like, you guys should just preach this sermon. Right? Because as they were just wrestling with it themselves, it's all right there. Right? And so the questions of like, well, what do you think he means? This came up this morning. What do you think he means when he says in verse 13, children born not of natural descent? What's natural descent? And then one of the other ones, it sounds like then we're like, we have to be born twice. Yes. It's John 3. It's exactly what he's talking about. So as we are there in the flesh, the beauty is we all have these moments that will come up in our everyday lives, everyday things, and we can really approach our faith in one of two ways. We've talked about this a lot. We've been wrestling with this for a few years just for our own journey. We can really approach our faith in two ways. Either our primary job is for Greg and Karen to have their light show, and then the minute they meet a neighbor, they invite them to Sunday morning. Their whole job is to invite them to church. That's it. Because then the expert up front will do all the ministry for them. Now, do we invite people to church? Of course. It's not that that's not part of it. But a lot of the times that can be the only thing. Now, what that does then is then Greg and Karen are off the hook. They did their job. They did the invite. They got into the gathering. But the sad, even though I say it in jest, what's so sad about that reality is that they're getting to miss out on discipleship. They're going to miss the whole thing, no matter what happens at that person. But the beauty is, we can take the other approach, which is the biblical approach. Is they're showing up in their neighborhood, light and darkness, and people come and have questions. Well, they can do everything that I or anybody else can do because they're filled with the Spirit, they are the light, and so what do they begin to do? They begin to disciple their people right there. Who knows, maybe a church emerges in their neighborhood. Why would they drive down the hill and come to this gathering when they live, like, that's the beauty of this, is we get to say, where are we? So here's what we're going to do for a couple minutes. We're going to get this practical. I'd like everybody, if you can, either on a piece of paper or your phone, just to have the ability to write a couple things down. You can make notes on your phone or a pencil or whatever. So what we see throughout the New Testament text, Greg and Karen are living it out in their neighborhood, is all of us are connected to a network or multiple networks. So what we see throughout the New Testament text, right, is that the gospel would go forward. The most natural place that people would witness is in their most natural place, wherever they were. So if it's their family, that's where witness starts, right? If it's their neighbor, that's where, if it's their job, wherever it is. So that's what you see throughout the New Testament text, is through these networks of relationships, disciples begin to be made, and as disciples begin to gather, churches emerge. That's what we see all throughout. Again, it's different than saying, hey, we're going to start a church, so we throw an event and hope a lot of people come. Now, probably most of us in this room came to know Jesus through that. So there's not that there's anything wrong. But what we see is if that's the only job is to invite, then we don't get to be in the flesh. Right? We only do in the flesh within these four walls. But the beauty is there's light in here. It's not dark in here. So we got to ask ourselves, if light only shines in darkness, where is the darkness? And we all live among it all week long. But if we only hang around the light, then it's like, well, it's all light anyway. Light doesn't need other light. So here's what I encourage you to write down. Think about your week this week. We're going to each try to write down. Now, you may have more than this. We'll just set like a threshold. Again, this is just an exercise. It's just a practical thing for us to do. I want to encourage us to write down like 2 or 3 or 4 names of people on, and I'll get to part 2 in a second if you don't have names. There's something we can also do there. But just write down the names of people that you know in your network. Again, whether it's biological family, people at work, the neighbor up the street, the guy who's come to the light show for the last 3 years, whatever it is. That either you know for sure they don't know Jesus yet, or you just don't know because you haven't talked to them. Like that's just never come up. So we're just going to, now, if you say, well, I don't really have any of those names yet. Maybe just the world you live in right now, it's just all around other lights. So here's what I would encourage you to do. We get to then begin to pray, Father, show me where those areas are that I can be light in darkness. So here's what I'm going to have us do after I'm just going to have us just be kind of quiet for a minute, just to reflect on that. Who are those people? And you'll get, like for me this morning, it was Adrian and Odiel, neighbors, guys I see all the time. But I've got other ones. And I even shared with them because part of the discovery group that we're doing is at the end, the last thing you talk through is like, who's somebody you can share this with this week? So they're kind of actually learning to share the gospel before they even know if they believe. That's kind of the beauty of it. They just share with somebody something you're learning. Well, I shared with them that there's a guy at work that I am actually nervous to talk with this about because he's just smarter than me and has really good arguments. But I love him, good friend of mine. So I shared it with them. Like, I'm actually kind of scared. Would you guys come? I think these guys aren't even like prayer people yet. But like, I really need prayer because I'm a little nervous to talk to this guy. I'm kind of scared, honestly. So he would be on my list. So whoever is on that list, the beauty of what we get to begin to do is it always starts with prayer. Praying, again, like the song this morning, praying for them. Praying the things that we know are God's heart for them. And we know those things because it's God's heart for anybody. So I thought what we could do this morning is take a few minutes and just get in a small group around the people that are around you. Now again, if you're more introverted like me, I actually hate doing this, but it's actually really good for us. So if I say do that and you're like, ugh, I hate that, it's okay. I hate it too most of the time, to be honest with you. But sometimes just being able to do those things, it just helps us be intentional. So what I thought we could do is just spend a couple minutes, just 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 right in your area, and just pray with each other for the people on your whatever list you just made. And just pray with each other. Like, so we can know and then we can help cover each other and be praying for each other, for the people that we really want to come to see come to know Jesus. So really simple. And then I'll just bring us back in a couple minutes and we'll go from there. So right now, take a few minutes and we'll just break up just in groups. And I thought just pray for them. Pray for the people on your list.